Cloudcast Media presents from the massive studios in Raleigh, North Carolina. This is the Cloudcast with Aaron Delp and Brian Gracely, bringing you the best of cloud computing from around the world.
Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. Welcome back to the Cloudcast. We're coming to you live from our massive Cloudcast studios here in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as we mentioned in late 2023, we're going to tweak the format of some of our shows a bit. Cloud News of the Week is going to take a break as a segment in the introduction. And today we're going to do our first ever Cloud News of the Month episode. This will replace Cloud News of the Week going forward. And today we'll recap the biggest stories and trends in January. If any of these items interest you, of course, links are in the show notes for further reading and research. Now, also as a note, we'll still put links that interest us weekly into the Cloud News of the Week document in the show notes. It hasn't gone away, and just look for it. It's right below the show number in the show notes. And we will be looking to convert that into something more useful, maybe a newsletter, maybe an email. We're not sure exactly, but some kind of format that will be a consolidated way to get more info out to our listeners on a regular basis. And as always, that link is a very quick way to stay up to date on news, including articles that came out even since Brian and I recorded this episode. There's always something going on out there. So with that, the introduction out of the way, we'll move on to Cloud News of the Month right after this short break.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the latest trends in enterprise tech? Look no further than the Breaking Analysis podcast with Dave Vellante. This data-driven program dives into the most important topics facing the enterprise tech industry today. With a data-first approach that leverages ETR's renowned surveys of IT decision-makers and insight from the CUBE community, Breaking Analysis delivers in-depth research on the most important topics facing technologists and IT buyers. Whether you're a business leader, an IT professional, investor, or just an avid follower of the industry, this podcast is a must-listen. Just search Breaking Analysis Podcast wherever you get your podcast and tune in today to stay ahead of the game in enterprise tech.
And we're back. And Aaron, how you doing, man? It's been a minute or two since we did a show together.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, doing good. But I'm more worried about you. And I have to apologize ahead of time for everyone. Brian's audio quality is going to be a little less because he's not in the massive studio. So where in the world is Brian and what's going on with Brian?
I am about a quarter of a way through a world tour. So I'm for the day job, I am doing all of our sales kickoffs. And so last week I was in Bali. This week I am in Vienna, Austria. Then I'm home for a few days. Then I'm off to Las Vegas. Then I'm home for a few days, and then I'm off to Argentina. So I'm in Vienna, Austria, the lovely city of Vienna, Austria. It is kind of cold and gray here right now. So I'm in a hotel. I don't have the full podcast microphone, so hopefully we can do a little bit of editing and warming up of the audio. But we'll do the best we can with this. So yeah, man, looking forward to this show. It's this is a little different format. So excited to kind of try this for 2024.
Yep, absolutely. So why don't we go ahead and dig right in? So what we've got is we've identified a number of big news for the month of January, but we're trying to also know, we don't want to just straight up, hey, we did this news and this news and this news. We want to a little bit of the trends behind it and have a discussion about that. So what's our first topic, Brian?
Yeah, so first one I feel like is sort of this culmination or combination of a lot of stuff. It feels like this is going to be the year where, I don't want to say we're at a breaking point, but it feels like there's going to be a lot of conversation, a lot of angst about kind of the combination of return to office mandates. We've seen some early layoffs, at which, where a lot of them are, we did overhiring over the last couple of years. There's, some people that are frustrated that, the company that they went to work for was focused on innovation, and now they're doing less innovation. And so it feels like there's just a lot of kind of angst between employee level, concerns and management level concerns. And it feels like it's really maybe the first time in about 10 years where, both sides didn't just sort of say, I want I kind of can get everything I want. And I think we're going to have some tension this year, and a lot of interesting things pop out of it, whether it's creative quitting or, mandates and, kind of online boycotts and all kinds of stuff like that.
Yeah. And I would say this too. I definitely, in articles I've been reading and just watching this trend, and I'm sure we're going to talk about it when it comes to, unicorns and some of the other things we're going to talk about here coming up. But I will say this. Yeah, I think tension is the number one word, because up until now, like you said, the economy was good and interest rates were good and money was cheap and it was okay to focus on innovation. But both Wall Street investors, companies, executives, we are now in the age of profits, profits, profits. And I think that is going to drastically change behaviors going forward, at least for the next little bit.
Yeah. And I mean, a lot of it is, stuff that is kind of basic business 101, successful business 101 stuff. It's just that, again, there's so many people that have either joined the workforce in even like the last 5 years. But then, you throw in the pandemic, and the pandemic kind of upset the apple cart in terms of how people worked and everything. But like a lot of these things really feel like they just sort of point back to accountability to a certain extent. It's like, I suspect every business out there at this has gone through is going through or has gone through some level of, we're going to try and keep costs below, we're going to try and reduce costs. We're going to try and, grow the business at X% and grow costs at a lower percentage than that. And for a lot of people, it's like, well, wait a second. Wait, you want me to work a little harder than I did before? You want me to be more accountable than I did before? And I think the hardest part of that is when there are layoffs, or when they realize they have a job that doesn't pay 100% bonus just every single quarter automatically. You create some difficult conversations that people just haven't had. But I think just as much as that, like you and I kind of came up during the time when, we didn't live in the main headquarters. And so you learned to work around sort of being at a disadvantage for that. And you had situations where it was like, yeah, we've seen companies go through layoffs, and we've seen some tough economic times a couple of times. And, like I said, we just haven't been through that in 7, 8, 9 years. And so a lot of these things feel like very foreign to people, but they're just, again, we're getting back to the era of accountability. And for a lot of people, that feels like, you're putting the clamps on me. You're kind of handcuffing what I can do.
Yep. Agreed. Well, I think that kind of wraps it up for that topic. Let's move on to our second topic, which is Broadcom and VMware. But I will say this ahead of time. Aaron is going to bow out of talking about this topic due to my day job. I officially have no opinion on the record about this whatsoever. So, Brian, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, well, and then again, this one really is kind of the quintessential cloud news of the week, cloud news of the month, because it's a topic that impacts a whole lot of people that probably listen to the show in one way, shape, or form, right? So, a lot of people were like, well, what's going to happen with VMware after the Broadcom acquisition? And it's now finalized. It's sort of finalized at the end of last year. And the last month or so, we've gotten a whole bunch of announcements from VMware. And so, I think the first way to look at this is just what did they announce? So, they announced, a number of cuts that was completely expected. I don't know that those are fully executed yet. A lot of that has to do with, the laws in the United States are different than the laws in Europe and the laws in Asia as far as notice of change and contracts and all that stuff. But, that sort of happened. None of that was unexpected. The second big thing they did was they've sort of consolidated a lot of their offerings. So VMware, like many companies, was very diverse in the products that they had. So, they had infrastructure products and storage products and networking products and cloud products and management products and security products and all sorts of stuff. And while they did a certain amount of bundling, they were more flexible about being like, well, if you want some of this and some of that, you can get it. And if you want the really high end stuff, that was oftentimes bundled. And Broadcom basically just came along and said, nope, you guys have made it too complicated. It's not efficient enough in how you sell. And to a certain extent, they're probably thinking you're giving the market too many opportunities to not have to completely buy into your stack, right? And so they've consolidated the product line way down. A lot of stuff that used to be ad hoc infrastructure is now all consolidated in vCloud Foundation. And then the third thing they've really done is sort of change the pricing structure. So they got rid of perpetual licensing, which is how VMware's done things forever. They've now moved to a fully subscription-based model, and that has sort of thrown things for a loop. And we'll put some links in the show notes. We're not going to comment on exactly what the pricing looks like, but in most cases, it looks like the pricing has gone up, not an order of magnitude necessarily, but in some cases 2x, 3x, 4x from what it was before. And so that's a difficult thing for a lot of people to swallow. And then the last thing they did was it looks like they have very much changed their partnering structure. So VMware was always a company who had huge go-to-market sets of partners from small to big, but they also had a huge number of technology partners. And they're sort of, I think, again, rethinking their whole partnership strategy, which my guess is a lot of that is driven around, how efficient was it? Because everything about this Broadcom acquisition has been, and they've been very clear about it up front because of how Broadcom runs all their other lines of businesses, is that, there is a certain efficiency and profitability structure that you will follow. Otherwise, we will either force you to get to that point one way, shape, or form, or we will get rid of that business. And so they have, I think for a lot of people, they sort of saw what was supposed to come. They didn't necessarily believe it was going to happen because it was like, well, that's not really how VMware's done before, and they've been relatively successful. And so it's been very interesting to watch how quickly all these things have gone in place, and then to watch, kind of the ripple effect. And the ripple effect is going to take, 6, 9, 12 months to even begin to shake out what it means in terms of, account control, product strategy. Does this work out? And so forth. So the intention was not to put Aaron on the spot because his company somewhat competes against VMware and to a certain extent partners with VMware. So that's why he's deferring on this one. But it's interesting to sort of watch all the big changes there.
Yeah, I will make this as a kind of an industry comment. And this goes back to, back when we had like Volante on the podcast talking about this. And that was a good bit ago at this point. But I mean, to your point, it was made extremely clear based off of past experience how this was going to play out. But I think it was surprising to a lot of folks in the industry how quickly they ripped the Band-Aid off and how quickly they executed on this. So it's one thing to see the plan, and then it's one thing to be like, oh, wow, okay, yeah, absolutely. They did that.
Yeah, I think the other thing that's weird about the VMware one, and again, it's one thing when somebody tells you exactly what they're going to do and you sort of go, well, I hope you're really not going to do that. Is the way that Broadcom tends to run their businesses, at least, in this case, the way they're doing this with VMware, is it feels very much like private equity. And I think in our mind, most of the instances that we've seen in technology when private equity ends up buying a company, the company they're buying is somewhat in decline, but they've got a big installed base. And I think the weird thing for VMware is I don't know if we're exactly sure if they're in decline. I mean, we know they have a big installed base. We know they have sort of a very cash-rich business and lots of renewals, and they're very, very sticky. But it does sort of feel like maybe this is the kind of the official statement from the markets, if you will, that VMware is no longer an innovation company so much as they are one that's just sort of steady state, and to a certain extent, like, this is the end of sort of innovation for them, because that's the model that Broadcom tends to have for the acquisitions, whether it's, a CA or something along those lines. So that part feels weird because I think we still look and think of VMware as a company that had been innovating up until at least the acquisition. So that'll be sort of interesting to watch if there's much innovation that happens, or if it just becomes very much a cash-rich maintenance business.
Yep, agreed. Do you want to move on to talking about unicorns?
Yeah, I think so. This is something that we've seen a little bit in the first month or so of the year, and it's one of those ones that I don't know for sure if a few data points are a trend or if a few data points are just a few data points. And so the reason we put this one in the notes was we've seen a couple of actions happen in 2024 so far. Gosh, I forget what year we're in. Yeah, 2024. It's like when you write the wrong date on a check or something like that, or fill it in the wrong thing.
Exactly.
But we've seen a couple of companies that we've had on the show in the past who, were sort of unicorns in the cloud native days. So, for example, I believe it was Armory was recently kind of in Harness in the CI/CD space, got picked up by Harness. D2IQ by Nutanix. There's been a few others that we've got in the show notes. And I think the thing that we put this in the notes for is partially like, hey, some companies got acquired, and we've often mentioned when Cloudcast guests or Cloudcast alumni get acquired, we'll often just highlight that they got acquired. These both, at least the way that they were mentioned in whatever public release was made, was these are like, we acquired the assets of that company, right? So the technology is maybe still sort of interesting, but the business didn't necessarily pan out. And the reason we highlighted this is because it does feel like, given the valuations that these early companies had, and hundreds of companies had during the 2020, 21 sort of unicorn rally when there was just tons of money crashing into the market, it does feel like those things are all kind of coming back to earth at this point. And so we're kind of putting this one on. We're going to keep an eye on it in terms of is this become a trend? Do we start to see a lot of these companies either get acquired or just sort of quietly publicly go bankrupt? I know we've seen unfortunately some layoffs in a number of these companies, some of the ones that we track and monitor and we've heard from people, but it does feel like the rise of the unicorn in 2020 and 21 is those unicorns' wings are quickly falling off, and they are quickly coming back to earth in maybe not the most glorious of ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, too, go take a look at the link in the show notes about this specifically, because it also goes back a number of years, and it actually has really interesting stats over time, and actually with some surprising stats on the number of unicorns in the last 10 years or so, and how many unicorns were minted per year. And that number actually went down when I don't know, I felt like I was surprised by that. I felt like it would have gone up, but we had more unicorns 10 years ago, minting per year, if you will. But then also too, the rate at which they're disappearing is increasing for sure, and the number of successful exits is definitely decreasing. And so it was really a fascinating read overall, because we can pick on the 2021 class and the 2020 class as like, hey, it was COVID and, there was venture capital money everywhere and it was basically a bunch of paper unicorns. And now they're all starting to wash out, which there's absolutely some merit to that. I think there was like 60 or 70, what they call paper unicorns, which, so it'll be interesting to see. I mean, I honestly don't think a lot of them are going to crash, meaning like close up shop and go out of business. But I think there will be a lot of acqui-hires going on in the industry. I think there's a lot of people going to pick up a lot of products and a lot of smart people pretty cheap.
Yeah, well, and it's like you and I said, maybe it was a year ago, whenever KubeCon was in Detroit. So I think that was it 21 or 22? We'll have to go back and look at those. But I do recall us specifically saying, like, if you walk around the show floors, there's 8 or 10 interesting topics and themes, but then there's also 6, 7, 8, 10 companies in every one of those domains, and we're like, there's just no way all of those can survive. So. So speaking of that, speaking of the sort of trends and stuff, the CNCF and Linux Foundation put out their kind of recent, bunch of recent research they had done on trends in their space, right? So how fast are projects getting adopted? How quickly are which projects are seeing more and more adoption? What did you see from that report? Was there anything in there that jumped out at you as being more popular or less popular than you expected?
Yeah, I would say, well, first of all, I'll just using air quotes here, IDPs, right? Platform engineering and internal developer platforms or portals, depending on which terminology you use, surprisingly high for me. And then the service mesh ones and, like Envoy and Istio and Cilium, lower than I thought. I mean, of course, Kubernetes is at the top and open telemetry is kind of at the top. But I mean, those weren't surprising. But I don't know. I kind of, in my head, those were flip-flopped, when I'm talking about IDPs or networking. So that was the one thing that surprised me in particular. How about you?
Yeah, I think I'm in the same boat as you. I think, seeing the telemetry stuff as high as it was makes a lot of sense because we're seeing more and more applications get deployed onto Kubernetes, and hence, because they're often distributed applications, people want to have visibility into what's going on. So, that becomes very interesting and immediately valuable, immediately necessary. I think Backstage as a product, from an IDP perspective, it's been interesting that the market is finally kind of consolidating around this one project, and especially it's also especially interesting given, again, it's another one that started from Spotify, so it wasn't like a Google project or something. But that's another one where you can kind of immediately place it into usage and go, hey, if I put this in place, what's the skill level needed to get this thing running? Well, I mean, it's basically just a giant portal. People have done those before. It's got a series of plugins, some security capabilities, but like you can kind of immediately be like, if I do this right, we take a bunch of steps out of our normal processes, remove a bunch of tickets and stuff. So that makes sense. My only comment on the service mesh stuff, having lived in that space for a little while, is I think it's two things. One, it's still super complicated and it involves the networking and security team. So change in that space never moves as fast as anybody thinks it will. And then the other part is, I think between Istio and Cilium, those two have become sort of competing for mind share with people as to what the standard's going to be. And Istio hasn't evolved as fast as it could. I mean, remember, like Istio came out around the time Kubernetes did and hasn't been nearly as fast growing as Kubernetes. And then Cilium's this sort of new thing that people are interested in because it feels like it fixes some of the Istio problems. But the issue with Cilium is, it's mostly controlled by this one company, Isovalent, who now just got bought by Cisco. So, that'll be an interesting one to see if, people keep sticking with it, if Cisco can figure out some way to do open source projects, or if that becomes, the classic, Cisco is trying to do open source, but their internal, proprietary way of doing stuff forever kind of gets in the way of it. So, it's security and networking. It never changes as fast as anybody thinks it does. So that one kind of didn't surprise me, having lived in that space for a little while.
Yeah. Well, and I'll add the Cilium and Cisco thing is another trend. I'll watch that really closely because, I mean, yeah, for the most part, projects, doesn't matter, like Apache projects, CNCF projects, with only one big company sponsor, don't tend to do well long term.
No, it's
there's just isn't a good enough ecosystem around it, right? And
right,
which is another reason why I'm like, that is worrisome.
Right. Yeah, and Kubernetes and Kubernetes is going to be interesting. Someday we'll look back and do a retrospective on Kubernetes as to, given that it started within Google, it almost didn't get open sourced. How it became this, having so many people contribute to the project, and it didn't sort of tip over just being a Google only thing. But I think it did have an impact on lots of things downstream of people being like, well, if you're not the owner of the project, will you make the most money owning if you're not the owner of the project or the maintainer of the project, the biggest one, can you sort of monopolize the money from it? And because I think it changed how Google did things. And I think we've seen a lot of projects since then like that. So yeah, you make a really, really good point. They don't tend to do well if it's a single vendor project, but it's also the thing that the vendor who starts it would always love it to work that way because it just makes community building much easier, at least in their mind. What else you got on the list? What else was kind of, I know you've got a whole bunch of AI stuff because you're living in that world these days.
Yeah. Do we want to do AI stuff or do we want to do Basecamp stuff quick? Which one do you want to do first?
Yeah, let's hit on the Basecamp stuff just a little bit. Did you have a chance to read through any of the latest stuff from the world-renowned DHH guy?
Yeah. I mean, full disclosure, I'll let my bias show right up front. I think that guy's a wacko. Like anytime he publishes something, I just roll my eyes and I'm like, oh God, what did he say now? But here's the thing. So, for those that aren't familiar, they did this big study and they've been, trying to make a bunch of waves in the industry about repatriation. Now, cloud repatriation as a concept, I've seen here and there. and I've seen things make sense. And I do know, like, hey, for certain workloads, like especially a super steady state workload that's not growing a whole lot, like, hey, it might be cheaper to bring that back in house. Like, there's absolutely cloud repatriation use cases, and it's something we're seeing. But I mean, is this a larger trend? And also I have another thought on like life cycle stuff I wanted to get to, but what's your thoughts first, Brian, on the?
Yeah, I'll set aside I'm in the same boat as you. The guy seems like a little more noise than, kind of more sizzle than steak. But I do wonder if, as an industry, we tend to get bent out of shape when people talk about repatriation because we're like, well, if you went to the cloud for a reason, you're probably not going to come back. I do think the one thing that he sort of highlighted, and I don't know that he has explicitly sort of called it out, but there's a lot of things that we've learned about how to do things sort of the cloud way, and sort of, there are now, when the cloud first came out, the biggest thing of it for all the bluster of it was, in essence, I'm putting an API on stuff that used to be, very manual and very, very tedious. So, I want compute resources, I call an API. I want storage resources, I call an API. And that has trickled its way back into sort of all sorts of things that you can do, back on prem if you really need to or if you want to. And so I don't know that we'll see as much repatriation as this in this use case. We've already seen 2+ years of people trying to kind of get their cloud costs under control. And so I think if anything, it might trigger a new wave of, hey, I don't have to put that in the cloud, because I've learned that if an application doesn't really change when it goes in the cloud, it's probably kind of expensive. And there's stuff I can do on-prem now in a more efficient way than I could 8 years ago, 10 years ago, whatever. So I don't know that it'll be repatriation, but I think it might spawn a new form of rethinking of like, do we need to be so committed to the public cloud if it's really just a data center replacement and it's end up costing us more than it would have before, now that we're more conscious about what cost looks like. So that to me seems like what might be the big takeaway from his bluster.
Well, and that goes to here's my thought on this is like, almost like think of everything like, hey, I'm going to spin up an app or even spin up a company. I don't think there's any doubt, going to the cloud is the fastest way. And if you're doing a startup, you're probably going to do everything in the cloud. You're not going to build a data center. You're not going to go buy servers. Like I get that. But then also too, once you reach a more steady state, a maturity level in the application, I think you reach a decision point that you just actually nailed. Am I going to keep going in the cloud because maybe I have some reasons, like maybe at different peaks of the year, or there's some kind of other reason why that cost alone isn't the only reason to necessarily keep it there. But I can see a maturity level where this thing is not changing that much. It's not going anywhere. It's business critical. Oh, by the way, I need to bring it in house. And yeah, like everyone will point at this, and they, before this, they put, Dropbox was famously another one as well. I can see that happening, but is that a majority case or is it a corner case? I don't know. Right. I don't know that that's well known yet, and I think this whole emphasis on cloud economics and cloud cost going forward is going to show this. But I could see this being almost like a late phase application process decision that's needed.
Yeah. No, I think that's fair. I think it's fair. I think if anything, it just highlights that, the sort of parity between private cloud and public cloud. Again, if you're not doing it explicitly for like, I just want a computer for a month or 3 weeks or scale to infinity, has maybe gotten a little closer than it was 5 years ago, 7 years ago, something like that. All right, let's get to your AI news. This is going to come fast and furious, and we'll just hit the highlights of it.
Yeah, exactly. So here's what we were thinking of doing is, because like there is so much going on in AI, and it is happening so quickly. We could very easily make this entire show about AI every month. I did not want to do that, so I picked an AI speed round, some of the big ones that have come in the last couple weeks. And we're just going to blow through them really, really quickly. If you're more interested, go take a look at the links. Cool. So how do you want to do this? You want to alternate them? What do you want to do?
Yeah, let's do that. Why don't we do this? We'll sort of read the headline and then one quick comment on it. I'll go first. Microsoft market capitalization hits $3 trillion. Second company in history to do that behind Apple. I think given the future of what Microsoft is doing right now with AI and sort of the mindshare lead they have. I can see a lot of people, kind of bidding up their futures as being very, very valuable, and it'll be interesting to watch over the next year plus as to how well they're getting adoption. But yeah, their work with all the co-pilots and then the stuff with OpenAI is, as we said multiple times, very, very impressive.
Yep. And I'll just add the comment too, from a momentum standpoint, and we've talked about this before, but it just feels like Microsoft is firing on all cylinders right now. Amazon, not so much. I will simply, state that, and that's probably a bigger conversation for another day. Moving on to the next, which is also Microsoft related. The next one is Microsoft formed a new team called their Gen AI team. It's going to report directly to the CTO. And the emphasis is building compact models that aren't dependent on OpenAI, and they're going to be releasing. They've already released a small model. I forget the name of it. It was like a 2 billion parameter model, and they're going to continue to do this. And part of the reason, opinion of Aaron, part of the reason of this is because, hey, OpenAI had the, shit show moment back in November, and they kind of realized, oh, wow, we're a little dependent on this. We've got $10 billion in this company. We probably need to go build some of our models. And these compact models are much more GPU efficient, much more energy efficient going forward. I personally believe the future of the industry is more in these compact purpose-built models. So I'm really happy to see them going in that direction. If nothing else, they're hedging their bet and they're going to play, both ways for now.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the hedging piece is probably a big piece of this. The other thing is, Microsoft has such a huge application portfolio, but any of those given applications just sort of do a finite number of things. It does make sense to go, hey, why wouldn't I build a model just based on best practices around Excel or best practices around, I don't know, Teams or something like that. Yep. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense, especially when kind of what does your portfolio look like? I can narrow things down and not have to be so broad.
Yep.
Third one on the list, Meta, Facebook Meta, hints at an upcoming Llama 3, which will have 600,000 GPUs under it by the end of 2024. So, Llama has sort of been the good counterpart, the good counterbalance to OpenAI. It has a certain amount of open source to it. So, it's good to see them continuing to get behind this, that they haven't sort of given up on it. I think there's probably still a lot of lack of trust with Meta or Facebook, that they won't sort of pull the rug out and try and monetize this more. But it's, at least for now, whether it's Llama continuing to get bigger or, small things like Llama now able to run on your laptop, it's good to have a sort of an open type counterbalance to what's going on with OpenAI.
Yeah, agreed. And also in the article they stated, Llama 2 was a good alternative, but they admitted it wasn't as good as, like say an OpenAI GPT model or some of these others. Well, Llama 3, they're training it now, but the goal is to be as good or better. So they're kind of in that race with Google and OpenAI and the others of who's got the best model. Now theirs, though, is they plan on open sourcing it, and then they also plan on continuing to build it into their products. So they're not going to be, hey, you go to Meta and you pay and have access to Llama 3 specifically, right? They're going to build it in like Microsoft is doing with Copilot, and they're also going to open source it. So their direction is slightly different from everyone else's, which is good. I think we need that.
Yep. Now the other interesting thing about this, and this sort of ties into the next one, you've got a note in here, owning GPUs, the 600,000, owning GPUs is the new arms race. But we did get a report from, I believe, the folks at Forrester, at least some of the analyst folks have gone through and basically figured out, based on the revenue numbers that are coming out of some of the cloud providers, seems like those GPUs might be a little underutilized or highly underutilized in the public cloud. What'd you read into that report?
Yeah, no, pretty much exactly that. And it's interesting too, because it's so weird because we almost are getting this artificial constraints in the industry. In the day job, I work with customers, and one of the biggest problems we have right now is getting NVIDIA GPUs, the A100s and the H100 specifically. And the problem with it is they're all going to the hyperscalers. Well, the hyperscalers are buying them to make sure they have enough capacity to make sure they never run out, but they're also overbuying to make sure they have capacity. So there's this weird trend going on right now where the hyperscalers have most of the GPUs, but at the same time, they're not necessarily using all of them. And at some point, that's going to rationalize out, but I don't think this year, for sure.
Yeah, no. Well, I mean, again, they've all been hoarding gigantic amounts of cash, so it makes sense for them. If as the new Salesforce Matthew McConaughey commercial says, if data is the new gold, they're all going out and buying the pickaxes. They're all going out and buying as many GPUs as they can possibly do. So,
yep.
We're not a stock investing site, but NVIDIA stock probably seems like a nice thing to have in your portfolio.
Agreed. So we don't mention Google Cloud, and it's so funny. Like we mentioned some of the others, but Google Cloud did have something, and I think this is actually really smart of them. And again, it feels like this larger trend of everyone's placing multiple bets. Google, of course, has was it Gemini? Maybe I forget. There was Bard, and I think Gemini is the latest one. But they're also going to partner with Hugging Face. Now, if you're not familiar with Hugging Face is the easiest way to think of it is an open source model hub. And I checked this morning, 487,000 different models, but no more than 5 months ago, it was like 300,000. So everyone, it's a place where people can download models, create models, customize models, and then upload them back. It's almost like a repository for a lot of these. And Google Cloud is going to partner with them so that you'll have direct integration into Hugging Face and be able to download a Hugging Face model and use it straight in GCP. I think it's smart. It's, now you have hey, if you want to use our big model, go ahead, our foundational model. If you want to use your own model off Hugging Face, go ahead and do that as well. And I think it's a smart move.
Yeah, it's Hugging Face is an interesting company. It seems like it's somewhere between like GitHub, right? Okay, we're just going to be a repository where you keep all your models, or in the case of GitHub, you keep all your code. Or is it more like Docker Hub, where it was like, it's another big repository for where you keep all your containers? I think GitHub figured out how to build an ecosystem around it so that people were really tied to using that system because it linked to projects and it had notifications and it could do team, kind of collaboration and all that stuff. Whereas Docker Hub just became, the world's largest FTP server. And I think ultimately, had a lot to do with why Docker struggled so much, because they were paying for everybody's, basically paying the bandwidth bill for everybody's downloads all the time. So Hugging Face is an interesting one of, when you have that many completely independent models, is there really much you can do around it, right? How much can you gather around what's going on there as an independent business that's hosting things? So do you look more like Docker Hub or do you look more like GitHub? So I think that's going to be the interesting to watch with Hugging Face, because I'm sure there's people who are like, do they become an eventual acquisition target? But then if you acquire them, like, what are you really getting? Because they don't own any of the models. They're just a landing zone for them.
Yep.
So they're an interesting one. That'd be an interesting thing to sort of dig into. So last thing on our list for the AI space, OpenAI launched their GPT store for custom GPTs. So this has been kind of in the works since this got announced like the day before the Sam Altman firing, and people kind of forgot about it a little bit. But I mean, this feels like the absolute. I mean, this feels like the Apple Store to Apple, to the iPhone, right? Yeah. This is the next logical progression for them to start monetizing. Now, what's going to be obviously really, really interesting to figure out over time is, how much of a cut do they start taking, right? Is there lessons they've learned from the new sort of Apple Store and Google Play Store, litigation's been going on, or is there something, is it just going to be a repeat of that? And then 5 years from now, they'll be in court, within the US or the EU.
And here's the other thing that I think is super interesting about this GPT store. I looked at it briefly. but here's the thing. Like let's say, okay, give you a use case. Right after we get that website at the Cloudcast, hey, what if we wanted to create a chatbot? How would you go do that today? Well, if you could download a foundational model, you got to host it somewhere, like the Google Cloud and Hugging Face thing, for instance, right? But how do you pull in the Cloudcast specific data? And that's where you got to fine tune the model, or you have to do RAG, retrieval augmented generation, which requires a database that it can go retrieve against. Things get complex quickly if you're not using an out-of-the-box model. Well, the GPT store allows you to, without programming, be able to customize the GPTs. And if anything, in the whole interest of getting up and running quickly, somebody who's not a data scientist or super into AI, they should be able to do it. And so it's interesting to me more of this customization angle. And can anyone do it? If I actually had to go create a Cloudcast chatbot, I would probably explore this first because it seems to be the most approachable. Now, is it in practice? I don't know. But that's what's really interesting to me about the GPT store.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's obviously going to be, how quickly can, quote unquote citizen programmers, right? Like you or me going, hey, I kind of want to add something to something, but I don't really know how it works behind the scenes. Like, how easy do you make it for me? And that's been the history of every technology advance, right? Like, remember when I forget who it was, when websites first started coming out, it was like, yes, you could learn all this HTML and CSS and all this stuff, or you could use, was it Dreamweaver or something like that?
Yeah.
Something like that. There was like, hey,
the past. Or
boom, here, anybody.
Microsoft had one too. Yeah.
Right. Like, boom, anybody could make a website. And you were like, oh, cool. You just drop and drag this stuff and it make it this color and use this font and drag this thing over here. And, so it's the equivalent of Wix or whatever for making a website. Yep. Right. It's kind of evolved to that. So yeah, that'll be really, really interesting to watch. And you're right that their bet is our model is good enough for most everything, versus everybody else trying to bet on, the conversation we had with Brandon just before the new year. So it does bring up one thing though, if in terms of us trying to fix the website or trying to do stuff, I will leave us with this one last piece of news. And this both affects us, plus it also kind of affects our audience. So maybe, folks are still listening to this. Apple has done two things over the last 2 or 3 months to impact podcasting kind of in a big way. The first thing they did via iOS 17. So if you have a fairly new version of iOS on your phone, which most people do at this point, they changed how podcasting works. And it doesn't really impact anybody in terms of how they listen to it. So you still, click on your favorite podcast like the Cloudcast, you give it 5 stars, you do all the wonderful things you ask for. But they changed how downloads work. And so if you're not listening to any given show, I think it's within 2 weeks.
I think it's 2 weeks. Yeah.
They will stop downloading in the background for you. So if you used to get for example, if you used to get the Cloudcast and you were like, yeah, I listen to it, sometimes I listen to it every week and sometimes I just can't keep up because I'm busy with stuff. It would download all the other ones in the background for you. They sort of stopped doing that. So that impacts, how we work with you guys. So if you listen to the show a lot, just please keep downloading it. Maybe just click it for 1 second or whatever. But the other thing they're doing is they are including now
transcripts,
all the words, all the words. But what's going to be interesting for that? So right now we don't necessarily provide transcripts of the show, and the reason we don't is not that we don't want to do it as a service, but we haven't found any services that are really, really good, especially given all the technical mumbo jumbo and jargon we have on this show. So that'll be really interesting. Those will probably start popping up for the Cloudcast if you listen to some sort of Apple related application for your podcast, whether it's Apple Podcast or some of the other ones. But what the other interesting part that'll tie back to your thing is they are apparently in the background. They're in the terms and conditions. It says you by default allow Apple to use all of your content from podcast to essentially potentially build an LLM and use that for future stuff. So maybe you will never have to build that chatbot for our website, Aaron, because Apple will just do it for us, and somehow it'll get it, and it'd be an embedded widget somewhere.
Well, and the other one is there's a kind of related but unrelated. I could see Apple either buying the company or doing this. There's another company out there, 11 Signals, maybe. I don't know. People are probably screaming at me right now with the company name, but big company doing voice AI right now. And they actually have the ability to take your voice and create a custom model, and then basically give it a recording in English, and then it will spit it out, translate it to, I think it's 10 other languages right now. And so there's a lot of podcast folks looking at that as like, hey, I'd love to have my podcast be available in German or Spanish or any of these other languages like that. I could see them also going down that route at some point as well.
Yeah.
It seems like Apple is quietly trying to differentiate themselves from Spotify, is I think the big competitor in the podcast space right now. And instead of going on content, they're going to try and go on features.
Right. Well, and it makes a lot of sense for them. I mean, this is something that I'm kind of surprised they didn't do earlier, but given how many podcasts there are out there now, and the fact that the technology is becoming pretty good, it would make an awesome capability for podcasts. So, as a podcaster, I would love to be able to say, if you guys natively listen in German or English or Japanese or whatever, you shouldn't have to struggle to listen to the stuff we're talking about, if you find it useful. So we'll see what happens there. So I think we've covered a lot of stuff, man. First cloud news of the month. I think we're going to do this once a month. It'll come out roughly around the first show of every month, give or take. We'll do the best we can, but let us know, folks. Let us know what you think of the format, if it's useful for you. If you'd like us to continue doing it, if we're still going to always have the link in the show notes to Cloud News of the Week. So Aaron always diligently populates that with tons of new stuff going out. But let us know how you like the more long form show versus the snippet at the beginning of other shows. You want to wrap it up and take us home, man?
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been, almost 45 minutes now. So if you're still listening, thank you, first of all. But on behalf of Brian and myself, thank you everyone for listening. And if you have the ability to leave a review, please leave us a 5-star review wherever you can. And please, of course, tell a friend about the show as well. We're definitely trying to continue to grow the show, and we're going to continue to play with the format a little bit in 2024, and we would love to hear your feedback as well. So I'm going to wrap it up for this week, and we will talk to everyone next week.
Thank you for listening to The Cloudcast. Please visit thecloudcast.net to find more shows, show notes, videos, and everything social media.